Would have been nice to know I had this last week. I really need to get out of this house. I am going stir crazy in here. Like, in my mind, this whole quarantine thing kind of sounds fun. You get to stay home. You get to be far away from people you don't want to talk to. Sounds great, right? The reality, though, is you stay inside in one location for a very long time and you don't get out. Like, I get The Shining now. So it's important to find ways to keep yourself busy, to keep your mind occupied. And like I said a few weeks ago, I've been going through my backlog of comics to try and take my mind off everything that's going on. Now, I realize some of you may not have a big backlog of comics to read, and therefore we need some suggestions as to what to read during this whole social distancing craze. Maybe you want something a little lighthearted and fun to keep your mind off of all the scary stuff happening outside. Or maybe you would want to read a story featuring a global pandemic or quarantining, just to give you some sort of a power fantasy during this time. So here we go. Here are 6 comics I think would be good reading during this weird ass time in history. Before we begin, follow me on Twitter. I deserve to have as many followers as my brother does. I mean, I think it's only fair. Now, in all honesty, there really is no bad choice for reading material right now. Any form of entertainment is ideal for taking your mind off of the fact that there's this mysterious virus out there and we don't have all the answers as to what it is or how to stop it, and our current infrastructure isn't really set up to deal with something like this, and our government officials who we're supposed to trust aren't really helping matters and they're just making it worse. But I want to get specific. Today we're going to talk about 2 different kind of books that you might want to read during the situation. Humor books and books that actually deal with a pandemic and quarantining and stuff similar to what's happening right now. Now, humor books, because obviously it's good to laugh during this troubled times. It's good to keep your spirits up and find some humor in some things. But also too, I am going to recommend books that deal with viruses, pandemics, being quarantined, desolate streets, and things like that, because sometimes it's good to look at a current situation through fiction in order to sort of make sense out of it and also maybe find the hope to keep going on. But let's start with something funny. Right off the bat, I'm going to recommend a 2005 cult classic from Marvel. What, huh? Now, I'm sure you're already familiar with Marvel's What If series, basically their answer to DC's Elseworld. Different stories that would ask questions like, what if Jessica Jones was a founding member of the Avengers? What if Gwen Stacy had lived? What if Jane Foster was the one to pick up Mjolnir and become Thor? That one actually became canon. But in 2005, Marvel decided to release a parody one-shot of this concept entitled What Huh? It's illustrated by Jim Mahfood and written by some of the top talent at Marvel Comics at the time. I'm talking guys like Brian Michael Bendis, Mark Millar, Brian K. Vaughan, Ed Brubaker, a real who's who of early 2000s, mid 2000s Marvel Comics. And these guys are clearly just having fun with all of the Marvel characters. Sometimes they'll do different multi-page stories like what if Galactus got food poisoning, for example. But most of the time it's one page or even one panel jokes, like what if Andrew Jackson was a member of the Fantastic Four? Or what if all the Avengers had beards? There's one panel that shows Ghost Rider riding a sports bike and asks, what if he went eco-friendly? It makes me laugh every single time. Jim Mahfood's illustrations here are perfect. Everything is given this exaggerated yet gritty style that matches the writing and the madcap humor very, very well. Now, admittedly, this may be hard to find right now in a comic book shop, aside from all comic book shops being closed. It is a random one-shot that was published over 15 years ago. However, it was recently reprinted in the Secret Wars 2 trade, and that should be not only readily available, but also a good buy, because that is a very funny book in its own right. It just so happens to also include what I think might actually be the funniest comic I've ever read. Now, keeping with the comedy comics theme, it's no secret that I'm a big fan of Valiant's Quantum and Woody series. This is often the funniest book on newsstands, especially currently, and it's the perfect book to read right now while you're cooped up inside, because it's all about two people who need each other, who live with each other, but can't stand each other. Because let's be honest, you've been cooped up with the same person or people for the past month now, you'll probably want to strangle each other at this point. Quantum and Woody is the perfect book to read because it feels very relatable right now. Now, the gimmick of Quantum and Woody is that they're the world's worst superhero team. Two stepbrothers who do not get along, but have to because they've been bonded on a molecular level due to a lab accident. This dynamic is a goldmine for petty squabbling and infighting even when they're trying to fight bad guys. And it doesn't help that both characters are kind of bad people. Quantum at least tries to do the right thing, but he often makes situations worse and often looks like an ass in the process. And Woody is just a straight up slacker doofus, but he has all the best lines, so you can't help but love him. There have actually been many different versions of Quantum and Woody. There's of course the classic 90s run, the original run by Christopher Priest and MD Bright, but for a more modern take, Valiant actually has 3 different volumes of Quantum and Woody to pick from, and they've each been written by James Amos, Dan Kibblesmith, and Christopher Hastings respectively. Christopher Hastings is writing the current series of Quantum and Woody, and it's definitely funny and worth checking out, but I will always be partial to the James Amos run. It's very smart, it's very funny, it's got a lot of great sight gags and really interesting characters, and some of the funniest panels I have ever seen in a modern superhero comic. Like, for example, this one. Gets me every time. But let's say you have kids. I get it. You want to find a way to keep them entertained without pulling your hair out in the process. Well, lucky for you, there's Tiny Titans by Art Balthazar and Franco. This is a great all ages comic that presents the Teen Titans as kindergartners. It's not so serious that kids won't enjoy it, they'll actually really like it, but it's also not so juvenile as to turn away adults. There's a lot for adults to like in this series as well. In fact, Tiny Titans has a lot of deep-cut references to the greater DC universe and its history. And the cool Muppet Baby style spin that Balthazar and Franco put on these characters really gives the whole thing a humorous style similar to that of Lego Batman. It has fun with the concept of the Teen Titans in the DC universe without making fun of them. Really, anything this duo does in this style is worth reading either with your little one or even by yourself. There's Superman Family Adventure, there's Itty Bitty Hellboy, Little Archie, even their independent work, Awesome Cat, and Aw Yeah comics. All of them very good, very easy to read, either by yourself or with your kids. I thought I owned the All Robin issue, but apparently I don't. I own the Shazam issue, which is fine, but I want the Robin one. I should fix that. Alright, enough with the funny crap. Let's say you want to read some fiction that reflects the world as it currently is. Something about, pandemics, being quarantined, maybe even desolate city streets. And no, we're not necessarily talking about zombie fiction, so no Walking Dead or anything like that. Sorry. Although, speaking of obvious choices, I am recommending Why the Last Man by Brian K. Vaughan and Pia Guerrera. Honestly, one of the best comics of the last 20 years. I thought I had a random issue of Why just laying around, or at the very least the first trade, but apparently I don't. I own it digitally though, so that counts, I guess. This series is about a plague that kills every single male on the planet except for 2. Yorick Brown and his pet monkey, Ampersand. Society starts to crumble and the surviving women must now try to cope with their losses and rebuild the world now that it's just them. Meanwhile, everyone's trying to get their hands on Yorick and his monkey, trying to figure out how they survived and what this could mean for the future. I really don't think it's hyperbole to say that Why the Last Man is one of the best comics ever made. It's a smart, clever, scary, touching, sometimes funny look at a world that gets ravaged by a disease. It shows people trying to pick up the pieces of their lives and move on from something as devastating as this. It shows just how dangerous and deadly people can turn when they're let down by a government and a society that hasn't prepared them for something like this. Admittedly, things are not as bad outside as they are in Why the Last Man, yet, but why does show that it's possible to move on and continue living after such a devastating incident. But if you do want your stories to be just a bit darker and present a more dire reflection of the world outside, then may I present to you The Empty Man by Cullen Bunn. I briefly talked about this series back in January when I did my video on all the different comic book movies coming out in 2020. Now that that video is grossly inaccurate, I figured now would be a good opportunity to remind you all of this little Boom Studios comic, because especially now, its subject matter is very relevant. Especially the second series released in 2018 with art by Jesus Harvas and Nico Guarda. Now, The Empty Man is about a mysterious disease called the Empty Man disease, which causes its victims to go insane, have violent rage outbursts, and ultimately death or suicide. The second series is important for the purposes of this video because it introduces the idea that a quarantine is mandatory for anyone suspected to be a carrier of the Empty Man. The only problem is the people who enter quarantine are never seen again. So when Melissa Carey is stricken with the Empty Man disease, her family go to great lengths to hide this from people no matter the cost. This is a harrowing tale of a family doing everything they can to keep one of their own safe, all while the world descends further and further into madness. Melissa is clearly sick and clearly needs help, but her family just won't send her off for quarantine because they believe that could be a fate worse than death. And there are those who are willing to help Melissa, but they turn out to be just as nefarious as those who want to harm her or those who worship the disease like a gift from God. The story does at times get pretty monster movie-esque, especially as it progresses, but I think it helps to illustrate the horror and fear that people have when they live during a situation like this, when they live during a scary pandemic. I really don't want to say too much about The Empty Man. It really is one of those series that's best to go in completely blind, but I do highly recommend it and the first volume because they're both fascinating depictions of a world coming to grips with this mysterious, scary virus that's out there. The Empty Man is obviously a horror story, and I know that horror isn't exactly everybody's cup of tea, especially in this situation. They don't want to read something scary, they want to read something escapist and fun. They rather read something a bit more hopeful. If it has a virus in it, it should be a virus that gets defeated like the way Batman would defeat the Joker, let's say. Well, as luck would have it, there is a story where Batman fights a virus, and he f***ing wins. Because he's Batman. Batman Contagion is a late 90s Batman event that saw the Dark Knight and his allies come together to try and stop this lethal virus that's spreading throughout Gotham City. This was one of those stories that just consumed all the Batman books that were on the stands at the time. Kind of like how a virus just consumes people. It's actually kind of shocking how this story from 1996 mirrors what's going on today, 24 years later. Someone comes back from traveling abroad, brings a deadly virus with them. The virus spreads quickly without warning, forcing everyone to go into quarantine. People are working frantically to find a cure and any answers they can get. Hell, even a main character gets infected, showing that the disease does not discriminate. Now, of course, the big difference between Contagion and real life is that one has Batman in it trying to help fight the virus and stop it from going any further. And fight it he does, using every possible option he has at his disposal. Working with Robin, Nightwing, even Azrael and Poison Ivy to try and stop this. It takes everything they have and then some to get the job done. Now, Contagion is a very good late 90s Batman event on its own, but it also acts as a precursor to the Legacy story that was the next big Batman event. Legacy is a direct continuation and is very good in its own right, but you don't need it in order to get the fullest out of Contagion. If you have to read one Batman versus a virus story, this is the one to read. So there you have it, friends. 6 comics for you to read while you're cooped up inside, trying to stave off cabin fever for as much as possible. Again though, anything you want to read during this time would be great. These are just my suggestions. If you want to let me know yours, feel free to do so either down below in the comments or anywhere on the internet. Links to all of these comics will be in the description below. Amazon actually has the newer editions of Contagion and Legacy, and these versions actually have the full stories. The versions I have are the older editions that are actually missing a chapter or two. I didn't feel like I missed anything, but if you're going to read these, you'll have the full story now. So you're welcome, I guess. If you don't already know, Comixology is offering a free 60-day trial of their Comixology Unlimited service. It's usually only 30 days, but given the circumstances, they extended it to 60. Some of the books I mentioned today are on Unlimited and some of them aren't. Either way, it's definitely something I think you should sign up for, so that this way you have just a library of books to read while you're cooped up inside. But if you can, and this is my little PSA for the video, I highly recommend you try and get these books from your local comic book shop. I know not every local comic book store is open right now, but some of them are doing curbside pickup or delivery. So if you can, buy it from them and support your local comic book store, because now more than ever, they need us. If your shop is closed and they'll reopen whenever they can reopen, then immediately go there and just buy stuff from them. Anything. It doesn't even have to be the 6 I mentioned today, just anything. Support your local comic book shop, please. And of course, don't forget that we have new videos on this channel every single Tuesday and Wednesday, with Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern being Wulff Den Live. So subscribe to see all of that, like this video, and share with a friend who really needs something to do while they're just sitting there hitting the refresh on their Amazon Fresh page trying to get a delivery date, because it's gonna be a while before they can actually get a proper date for their groceries to be delivered. Trust me, I've had a cart full for like the past week and still nothing. Thank you all for watching. I will see you next time. Wash your hands.